Everyone has one or two secrets they'd rather keep hidden. I'm no exception. Back in the day, I was quite a wild child, although now I've become a demure and unassuming woman. Losing my parents at 15, I quickly went astray and joined a gang of troublemakers. I gathered some of the girls from the gang and formed a ladies' group. Thanks to being forced to learn wrestling by my dad since childhood, I was known locally for my overwhelming strength, surpassing even the boys. My life in that world came to an end after meeting a certain person. But living such a life, it seems you inevitably accumulate some lingering issues. My name is Nancy. Now 35, I live as an ordinary housewife, working at a local supermarket. With my light makeup and quiet demeanor, no one would guess that I once wore flashy makeup and rode around on motorcycles. Yes, I was a member of a delinquent group and the leader of a ladies' gang. But then, I met my husband, Joshua, and everything changed. It all started 10 years ago, during a clash with a rival gang, when Joshua unexpectedly intervened. That gang used to start fights at every gathering. One day, a particularly fierce brawl broke out. Joshua joined in to save his brother, a member of the rival gang. As members of both groups were falling, Joshua and I were the last ones standing. I remember Joshua laughing at his mistake, realizing his brother wasn't even there. His dignified appearance somehow struck me, and I found myself speaking to him. "Hey, you're pretty cool." "Me? Really? Looking like this? You must have some strange tastes. Were you calling out for someone named Noah? Did you find him?" "No, it turns out my brother wasn't here." That's how our slow, private conversation began. Joshua's brother, it seems, was an irredeemable delinquent. Joshua had even taken up boxing, trying to reform him. Joshua himself admitted he couldn't stand to ignore wrongdoing. He struck me as a man brimming with a sense of justice. Through our conversation, we grew close. Over time, we met more often and it became clear that we had feelings for each other. But back then, Joshua despised delinquents. Despite our mutual attraction, my involvement in the delinquent world prevented our relationship from progressing. Finally, Joshua said that if I left the gang for good, he'd want to be with me. Tired of the senseless fights, I took the opportunity to leave the group. We started dating and got married 5 years later. The group I was part of got disbanded by a rival faction 2 years after I left. After marrying Joshua, I completely transformed into a calm and graceful woman. But recently, our peaceful life was threatened by a certain neighbor. Joshua's sister, Sonia, and her husband. One day, as I was about to see Joshua off to work, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? I'll check. The next moment, Joshua looked surprised. Sonia. He mentioned his sister, whom I knew. I had met her once at a family dinner. Hey Joshua, we've moved next door starting today. Please take care of us. Hello, I'm Tony, Sonia's husband. Well, looking forward to your cooperation. You are. The two of them started off with a disrespectful attitude. But since one was Joshua's sister, I couldn't be too confrontational. We get along well with the in-laws, so I didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. And it turns out, Tony was the person who lured Joshua's brother, Noah, into the delinquent world. They both went to the same high school and were a year junior to Joshua. Joshua turned 34 this year, so they must be 33. Sonia, 3 years younger than Joshua, should be 31. Joshua, too bad about your brother, huh? Tony, I don't care about Noah anymore. Even you. Joshua was visibly angry. His brother had passed away due to a fight. Joshua's brother and sister apparently never got along well. Sonia felt neglected in favor of her brother and developed a rivalry, which eventually extended to Joshua as well. Joshua once mentioned how difficult it was to deal with his sister, preferring to dote only on his brother. And like me, Sonia was also a former member of a delinquent group. Unlike her voluntary involvement, Noah was forcibly recruited by Tony. Seeing his siblings' transformation, Joshua probably grew even stronger in his sense of justice. As the three glared at each other, I spoke up from behind Joshua. "Joshua, you need to leave for work soon." "Ah, right." "Running away, Joshua? Remember, I haven't forgotten that you laid hands on me." "That was because you attacked Noah." "All right, both of you, enough. We're done here." With Sonia's words, Joshua left for work, still unresolved. And at the same time, the bell tolling the start of Sonia and her husband's harassment began. An hour after Joshua left for work, the doorbell rang. But when I checked, no one was there. An hour later, there was a loud noise at the entrance as if something was violently placed there. When I looked, there was a heap of cardboard boxes dumped in front of the door. "What's this about?" No one was around. So I decided to ignore it and went back inside. Then, I heard a small popping sound from the balcony. I hurried over and found 3 broken eggs scattered. We live in an apartment on the corner, next to the room Sonia just moved into. This means the harassment likely came from Sonia's room, as there are no neighbors on one side and it's too high for someone from below. Angry, I confronted my next-door neighbors. "Hey, is that you? What do you want, showing up like this?" Sonia greeted me with an irritable demeanor. "Is this your idea of a prank? Throwing eggs on our balcony?" It had to be Sonia or her husband. The angle only made sense from Sonia's balcony. But Sonia glared at me, replying, "What? Don't be absurd, lady." "Lady, you got proof we did it? Make false accusations and I'll call the cops." Despite being a former gang member, her reliance on the police in such a situation seemed second-rate to me. "I have no proof. But the way the eggs are scattered, they could only come from your balcony." I tried to remain calm. But Sonia kept glaring and arguing back. "Proof? That's weak. Hey Tony, the lady next door is complaining." Hearing this, Tony joined in. Hey. Just because you're Joshua's wife doesn't mean you'll get any special treatment." If Sonia was second-rate, Tony's words were no better. He might think he's intimidating, but to me, it's not frightening at all. I could feel my old self stirring. But I didn't want to revert to my past. So, I played the role of a meek, unassuming woman and said quietly, "Please, don't raise your voice." Inwardly, I wanted to deliver a roundhouse kick right then and there, to snap that foolish neck. But having reformed after meeting Joshua, I didn't want to throw away all my efforts for something like this. Seeing my reaction, they both burst into laughter in front of me. "Haha, so you're Joshua's wife? I thought you'd be something special, but you're just a dull woman." Weak. Tony was giving you too much credit. At the family dinner, you seemed like a real introvert. "Ah, a kick alone won't suffice. I might need to dislocate a joint or two." Trying to control my rising anger, I was told, "Go on, leave." And the door was closed on me. I stood there, staring at the closed door. I pondered telling Joshua, but knew that even if he spoke to Sonia, they'd just feign ignorance. It would only result in more harassment and frustration for me. So, I decided against it. The next day, and the day following, the harassment from Sonia and her husband continued. It always began after Joshua left for work. "Who dumped this garbage at our doorstep?" It must be those two. As I was about to leave for work at the supermarket, the door got stuck halfway, blocked by a bag of garbage. I reluctantly took it to the disposal area and then headed to work. 5 hours later, I returned home to find, "This is unbelievable!" There was a cardboard box in front of the door, arranged like a table. On either side of the box, lit candles were placed, and in the center, a vase with flowers was set. On the door above, a photo of me, taken who knows when, was stuck. They were mocking me as if I was deceased. Furious, I was about to kick the cardboard away when Joshua called from behind. "Nancy?" Startled, I turned around to find Joshua, who had come home from work. "You were an hour early?" "I got off work early today." "What's all this?" Joshua was also surprised at the sight in front of the door. We quickly cleaned up the cardboard and candles from the shared hallway and went inside. There, I told Joshua everything that had happened. "So, it's likely Sonia and her husband. But we don't have any proof, so even if we confront them, they'll just deny it." After a moment of thought, Joshua had an idea. "Let's buy cameras. One for the balcony and one for the entrance. Especially hidden well at the entrance." I agreed with Joshua's suggestion. There was a limit to how much more we could endure. We immediately purchased cameras online. We had the cameras delivered to Joshua's workplace to avoid suspicion. "For now, we'll just have to endure until the cameras arrive. Then we can retaliate with evidence." Understood. So, I bore the harassment from Sonia's house for the next couple of days. For most people, endurance means being unable to fight back due to lack of strength or fear. But for me, it was different. I was holding back the urge to retaliate. In a world where using force was permissible, I would have already pulverized those two. Having the ability but not being able to use it was incredibly frustrating. 3 days later, Joshua came home with the cameras. "Any trouble since?" "The usual. Today, they even threw a fish head onto the balcony." "Let's set up the cameras right away. Put one behind the air conditioning unit on the balcony, aiming at Sonia's balcony. We'll hide another near the fire extinguisher by the entrance." The day after installing the cameras, Sonia's antics started again as Joshua left for work. I monitored everything through a recording app. Sure enough, the two of them started their antics. I silently observed and left for work when it was time. 2 hours into my shift at the supermarket, Sonia lined up at my register. Well, if it isn't my sister-in-law. I silently scanned the items. It was clear from Sonia's tone she knew it was me. Her demeanor dripping with condescension. "Aren't you a bit cold for a cashier? Shouldn't you be more hospitable? Come on, give me a discount on this." Other customers were lined up behind Sonia, watching our interaction with concerned expressions. "Hey, I'm not a scarecrow, you know." A middle-aged man in line spoke up to Sonia. "Hey, can't you see she's uncomfortable?" Sonia whirled around, glaring fiercely. "Shut up! It's none of your business." The man seemed completely deflated by Sonia, who suddenly yelled at him. The man shrank back and left the line. I then addressed Sonia for the first time. "Ma'am, if you continue to behave inappropriately, I'll have to call security." I spoke in a calm but icy tone. Perhaps mindful of the others watching, Sonia retorted, "Geez, it's just a joke." "Ah, so disappointing," and left the store, abandoning her items halfway through the transaction. The other customers stared in astonishment. My anger was just about to boil over. When I returned home after work, there was a notice on the door. The note on the door read, "Useless cashier." That's it. I can't take it anymore. I ripped off the note in frustration and waited anxiously for Joshua to return. After Joshua got home, we reviewed the footage from the cameras. It clearly recorded Sonia and her husband's misdeeds. Now we can fight back. All right, let's go now. Anger filled Joshua's eyes. When we rang Sonia's doorbell, Tony answered. You two again? What do you want this time? Sonia appeared behind him. What do you want, Joshua? The two of them asked lazily. We finally began our counterattack. You too. As I started to speak, Joshua stopped me and stepped forward. Nancy, let me handle this. Sonia, and you, Tony. If you harass us any further, it won't end well for you. Joshua's voice was low and menacing. Tony retorted. What? You want to fight? Do you even have proof we did anything? Making baseless accusations like before. Before Tony could finish, Joshua started playing the video saved in the recording app. What this is? Our video capturing your wrongdoings. We had to install cameras because your harassment was too much. This silenced the usually talkative pair. Tony. Sonia, showing a hint of panic, turned to Tony. Tony, frowning deeply, glared back at us. Damn it, you got us this time. The trouble started from your end, remember? I said with a serious face. Tony retorted. So, we settle this with force, huh? Wait there, Joshua. I'm calling someone. Call whoever you want, we'll be ready. Joshua stood firm, undeterred. As the situation escalated, Tony desperately pleaded into the phone. William, I need backup, now. His tone was completely different from the bravado he showed us, repeatedly begging for help. After hanging up, he turned back to us. Get ready. William, the most notorious guy around here, is on his way. He smirked at us. Convinced of his imminent victory, but relying on someone else's strength showed his true cowardice. Why don't you confront us directly? Ha, keep talking. I know your strength well. I called a special guest this time to ensure you both feel real terror. What a pitiful sight it was. No matter how much they threatened, neither Joshua nor I felt any fear. You must be too scared to even speak, the quiet and meek Nancy, right? Sonia taunted me with a condescending tone. 5 minutes later, the much bragged about William arrived. However, he looked surprised when he saw us. William, over here. Long time no see, William. Sonia and Tony were visibly excited, having high expectations of him. But their expectations were quickly shattered. What's going on here? Indeed. Long time no see, Will. My calling him Will left Sonia and Tony with puzzled expressions. Joshua also greeted him. It's been a while, Will. The couple looked even more confused by this interaction. Confused, Tony asked. What's this? How do you know William? As Tony spoke with sweat on his forehead, Will looked back and forth between us. I simply said to him, Will, let's not do this, okay? Hearing this, an angry Tony retorted. Don't joke around. William, please, do something. Please. Sonia and Tony were frantic, unable to grasp the situation. But then Will addressed them. Hey, don't tell me you messed with Nancy? His question left the couple momentarily stunned. So, what if we did? Tony answered hesitantly. Furious, Will shouted. Idiots! Don't you know who you're messing with? His rebuke left them standing frozen. They clearly had no idea what was going on. Seeing this, I turned to Joshua and said, "Hey Joshua, can I revert to my old self from 15 years ago, just for now?" Instead of Joshua, it was Will who turned and responded, "Nancy, please don't. If you do something to them, it might end up more than just an injury." "What? You're giving me orders now, Will." No, I didn't mean it like that." Seeing the special guest they called for help now humbly apologizing to me, Sonia and Tony were bewildered. "What's happening here?" Their faces turned pale as Will spoke. "Do you two know about BBN?" "Well, yes. It's famous. It stands for Black Butterfly Nancy, right? The nickname of the former leader of a ladies' group." "That's right. And this lady here is Nancy herself." "No way. Really? What?" Both lost their bravado in an instant. Continuing, Will said, "Back then, I led another delinquent group. But we were decimated by Nancy's group. She could take down 30 people by herself." Sonia and Tony now looked at me fearfully. It made sense. They'd been harassing someone who they thought was inferior, only to find out she was the leader of a ladies' group they themselves had once belonged to. "I didn't know. Nancy is practically a legend. We joined the group 6 months after you left." As Sonia said, she and Tony had joined the group half a year after I had left. Will had been scouted by me and stayed in the group even after my departure, and looking after Sonia and Tony as their senior. He left the group just before it was decimated by a rival group. By that time, Tony had taken over as the leader, and was the last leader before its downfall. Before you ruined it, it was an invincible group. You can't match Nancy. That. How could this? Tony was increasingly cornered and distressed by Will. "Well, the group that took you down is now the strongest in New York State. But if Nancy was still active, she would still be the strongest." Hearing this, Sonia and Tony collapsed, their spirits broken. Seeing this, Will turned to me and apologized. "Please forgive them for my sake." Watching Will apologize, Sonia and Tony had completely lost their will to fight. They never imagined their call for help would backfire this way. "All right, but you'll have to settle your dues properly." I glared at the two of them and said, "Ah!" They let out a short scream. "For 1 month, you'll clean this apartment and our balcony that you dirted. If you skip even 1 day, I won't be so forgiving next time." "Okay." Sonia, completely intimidated, managed to stutter out her agreement. Tony, unable to speak, just kept nodding frantically. Watching them, Will commented, "No one can really stand up to Nancy." Hearing this, the silent Joshua finally spoke. "But I hate delinquents. If Nancy hadn't reformed, I wouldn't be here." Looking down a bit, Joshua said softly, and I peered up at him. "Don't worry. I won't show that side of me again." Will burst into laughter at this scene, and we all ended up laughing together. Will and Joshua knew each other because the three of us had met after I left the group. We bumped into Will while on a date and had tea together. "Well, now that's settled, why don't you come over for dinner, Will?" We three left Sonia and Tony slumped by the entrance and headed to our apartment. Before entering, Joshua added, "Sonia, you're my sister, so I'll let this slide just this once, but there won't be a next time." Watching him, I wondered if he too was hiding the same fighting spirit as us. From that day, the harassment from Sonia and her husband completely stopped. As promised, they continued cleaning our balcony and the common areas of the apartment. Though just delinquents doing chores, other residents sometimes looked at them curiously, but that soon stopped. After a month, Sonia and her husband left the apartment without a word. Even Joshua, their blood relative, didn't know where they went. They probably left, feeling awkward about staying in the same place. We had no reason to get involved further and thought they finally made a wise decision. Finally, we had our peaceful life back. Though neighborhood troubles are common, I never thought I'd be directly involved. At least it was resolved amicably. I have a past I'd rather keep hidden. Joshua has kept it secret all this time. I'm not ashamed of all my past, but I have reflected on my mistakes. I just want to cherish my life with Joshua now. And I hope to live without ever showing my true nature to anyone again. That's all I'm thinking about now. My health's been declining recently. To support my mother-in-law with her health issues, our family decided to temporarily live in her house. And so began our days of being constantly bossed around by my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. Then, one day, as my husband was driving, a call came in from my mother-in-law on his cell phone. Because of the poor signal, we put the call on speaker mode. Is she still alive? Stubborn, isn't she? If I wasn't there, she might have been seriously dead. Unaware that they were on a call, the two began their alarming conversation. And just like that, their sinister plan crumbled. Next, they were to receive social penalties for their outrageous actions. My name is Wendy. I live happily with my husband Tony and our beloved daughter Vicky. Our daughter has recently started kindergarten and she seems to be having a great time every day. Seeing her like this brings a smile to my face each day. Then, one day, my husband got a call from my mother-in-law, Barbara. My health's been declining recently, she said in a weak voice. Barbara had suffered a stroke in the past, leaving her with a slight paralysis in her limbs. That being said, her symptoms were not severe, and she was able to live her life without major inconvenience, walking around with a cane. According to her, the after effects of the stroke seemed to be causing her pain. It's hard to live like this. I'm not getting any younger, and if something were to happen, I might not be as lucky as your father was. Barbara continued nervously. What about we all live at your place until your health stabilizes? Catching me off guard. What about your brother, Matt? As far as I knew, Matt, Tony's brother, was living with my mother-in-law. But according to her, Matt was busy job hunting and she didn't feel secure with him alone. I was torn. To be honest, I didn't get along well with Barbara. She always had a lot to say and I had experienced her being rather harsh towards me in the past. But it wasn't just me who had issues with my mother-in-law. My husband, Tony, didn't exactly have the best relationship with his mother either. Apparently, she had always favored Matt, the eldest son, while Tony was treated as if he were an afterthought. When I broached the topic, Tony replied with a troubled look. That's true, but still, I am her son. Indeed, this seemed like a sentiment typical of Tony, a man of strong responsibility. Out of respect for my husband, I agreed to the temporary move to my in-laws' house. Moving homes is a big deal. Fortunately, our home and the in-laws' home aren't too far apart. Our daughter, Vicky, probably won't even need to change her kindergarten. Also, Vicky herself seemed fairly excited about the idea. So, I convinced myself, thinking, it's just until Barbara's health improves. With that, we started our life at my in-laws' house. But my burden turned out to be more than I had expected. First off, the house itself is pretty old, and its size means housework is quite a struggle. The time required for cleaning is off the charts. What's more, the volume of cooking and laundry has nearly doubled. I was under the impression that I'd just be helping my mother-in-law, but in reality, most of the housework fell on my shoulders. And while I was working hard, my mother-in-law was. Vicky, darling, it's such a lovely day, why don't we go shopping together? I want to come. And off she'd go, enthusiastically spending time with her granddaughter. And then, you see, that painting of Matt's won a gold medal. Oh, really? That's interesting. Hey! Are you really listening? This is the amazing part. She'd ramble on endlessly about trivial past achievements of her favorite son, all while munching on snacks. To be honest, it was seriously annoying. She seems to be in great shape. How is she in poor health? I eyed my mother-in-law with suspicion. Suddenly, she started coughing as if she was startled. Am I imagining the insincerity here? Well, let's end my rant about my mother-in-law here. Next is about my brother-in-law. He was also a significant pain in the neck. Contrary to the stories I'd heard, Matt turned out to be a jobless singleton almost entirely dependent on his parents. And his thoughts and actions were so childish, it was hard to believe he was a man in his 40s. Wendy, I'm hungry. Where's my lunch? Wendy, why didn't you wake me up? I missed my favorite show. I found myself catering to him as well. Even Vicky, my daughter, helps out around the house. He seemed to think he was entitled to having others look after him. I'm not your wife nor your mother. I screamed inside my head. The fact that he called me Wendy darling was also creepy. Moreover, there was something unnerving about the way he looked at me. So, I was leading a tough life, both physically and emotionally, due to these two people, but one night, several relatives had gathered for a drinking party at our home. I went upstairs to fetch a fan to improve the ventilation in the living room. The fan should be around here somewhere. Wendy. When I turned around, my brother-in-law was standing behind me out of nowhere. Then, with a smirk on his face, he said something unbelievable. Why don't you ditch boring Tony and start over with me? I couldn't believe my ears. But it seemed I had heard him right. He was ogling me with a lascivious grin on his face. He might have been emboldened by alcohol, but his remark was disgustingly crude to the extreme. Brother-in-law, you're clearly too drunk. That's not funny, even as a joke. Huh? Are you sure you want to reject me? I might spill your secret to Tony, you know? What? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm busy, so I'll leave now. With that, I tried to ignore him and head downstairs. But he forcefully grabbed my arm out of the blue. Come on, I'm way better than Tony. Stop it, just stop it. Startled, I jerked my arm away from my brother-in-law. Unexpectedly, Matt lost his footing due to my sudden resistance. He tumbled down the stairs, ultimately hitting the back of his head against the wall with a groan. Hearing the commotion, Tony and other relatives rushed over. Hey, what's going on here? Oh, Matt just slipped. Oh my! Look at that bump on his head. While his mother fretted over him, shaking him violently. Other family members managed to calm her down and took Matt to another room for first aid. Amid all the confusion, my quarrel with Matt was forgotten. I contemplated whether to tell Tony about Matt's advances but decided to stay silent for now, not wanting to cause unnecessary worry. If Matt's actions escalated, I would speak up. With that thought, I made my way towards the living room where everyone was gathered. Then, in the corner of the hallway, I saw Vicky looking at me with a worried expression. I'm sorry if I scared you, honey. Did I wake you up? Let's get you back to bed. Okay. Something about Vicky's demeanor felt off. But it was late, and I didn't question further, taking her to her room to put her back to bed. Life remained difficult due to my mother-in-law and Matt. Every day, I was forced to entertain my mother-in-law's uninteresting chatter and attend to my immature brother-in-law's needs. I felt like running away. However, Matt hadn't made any more advances since that incident. It seemed he had learned his lesson after my strong rebuff. With that, I felt a bit relieved and carried on with my life at my in-laws. But then, on a particular day, another unexpected incident befell me. I was having lunch with my mother-in-law as usual, when I suddenly felt dizzy after eating some tomato soup. Next, I was hit with intense nausea and difficulty breathing. I recognized this sensation. Yes, it was an anaphylactic shock, an allergic reaction. I have a severe allergy to peanuts, and if I consume even a single one, I can have breathing difficulties. Luckily, my brother-in-law was at home so we could quickly call an ambulance. Seeing me in distress, he rushed to pull out his smartphone, his fingers seeming to falter. It looked like he had become too flustered to remember the number. When I managed to gasp out 911, he finally started pressing the buttons on his phone. Despite some fumbling, he managed to call an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital where my life was saved. Lying in the hospital bed, I thanked my brother-in-law. Thank you, brother. Oh, thank you so much. You saved Wendy's life. Tony cried, tears in his eyes as he grasped his brother's hand. Taken aback, my brother-in-law replied, a bit bashfully. Well, I just did what any person would do. Although I was annoyed to admit it, even such a despicable person can be useful at times. I had to admit, I saw him in a slightly different light after that. But as much as I felt gratitude towards my brother-in-law, something else was bothering me. Why had I had an allergic reaction? Afterward, I stayed in the hospital for observation for 1 day. The next day, I was discharged without any complications and got into the car that Tony was driving to return to my in-laws' house. In the car, my daughter Vicky asked with concern, "Are you okay, Mom?" "Yes, I'm fine now. I'm sorry for worrying you. I thought my heart was going to stop when I heard you had been taken to the hospital." I was careful with the ingredients, though. I tilted my head and said. Just then, Tony's phone rang. "Oh, it's Mom." Because he was driving, he quickly switched to speakerphone. However, it seemed like there was a problem with the connection, and we couldn't hear what she was saying clearly. "Hello? That's strange." After a few seconds, we finally entered a stable call mode, but it seemed my mother-in-law hadn't noticed. She spoke to my brother-in-law Matt with a troubled voice. "It seems like the call got cut off. Can't Tony even answer the phone properly? He's really useless." Their conversation made our faces pale. "And she's still alive? She's really stubborn, isn't she?" "Mom, you shouldn't say things like that. If I hadn't been there, she might have really died." "Doesn't matter. It's just karma for hurting my precious Matt." "Well, I did think it served her right." "So, what are we going to do about Wendy?" "Yeah, I'll try to win her over again. I think I can make it work this time. I mean, she probably fell for me again after this incident. After all, I'm her lifesaver, aren't I?" Unaware that they were being heard, they continued their alarming conversation. Meanwhile, Tony and I were left speechless, exchanging glances. Later, we arrived at my in-laws' house later than scheduled. "You sure took your time. Tony, you should have answered the phone. I wanted you to get something on your way back." They greeted us as if nothing had happened. On the other hand, Tony and I had stern looks on our faces. "Well, we had to stop by the police station." "Police station? Did you lose something?" "Vicky, your dad and I need to have a serious talk. Can you go to your room for a bit?" "Sure." As our daughter headed for her room, I thrust Tony's phone towards my in-laws. Then, I replayed their conversation that had been recorded. As a matter of fact, I had quickly set Tony's phone to record mode at that time. Upon hearing this, my in-laws' faces turned pale with shock. "What? How did you?" I continued, glaring at the two who wore guilty expressions. "What in the world is going on here?" "Well, that was just a joke. Sort of a small payback for you rejecting Matt." "Stop it, Mom. Don't mention." The brother-in-law stammers, trying to stop his mother from digging herself deeper. But it was already too late. "What? She rejected Matt. What is this about?" As I explained to my husband, his normally gentle face transformed into something monstrous. Then, he furiously started questioning his mother and brother. Before his onslaught, they confessed everything. It turned out that my mother-in-law was attempting to set me up with Matt. Worse still, the brother-in-law seemed to be on board with the plan. So, she had feigned illness to lure me to their house. The idea of trying to turn her daughter-in-law into her son's fiancé was so outlandish, I was chilled to my bones. The reason for this bizarre plan? They felt sorry for Matt, being single despite being the older brother. Their lack of empathy was so astounding, I could hardly believe they were human. Needless to say, their selfish scheme didn't pan out. And Matt ended up tumbling down the stairs in a pitiful fashion. As I remembered the events, I shuddered. At the same time, something my brother-in-law had said stuck in my mind. "What secret about me were you using as a threat?" With a side glance at my husband, he grudgingly replied, "It was about that $50,000 you're hiding." It appeared he was after my personal wealth as well. But he was way off the mark. He and my mother-in-law assumed that I was secretly earning money through stock trading or foreign exchange, but in reality, the money was from my hobby of writing, which I'd been doing for some time. In other words, it was a savings account approved by my husband, not some hidden wealth. He's always told me, that money is something you earned with your own hard work, Wendy. You can use it whenever you think it's necessary. Apparently, my brother-in-law had seen my bank book by chance when he visited our house and told his mother about it. "Why not make her your wife then?" she had suggested. Indeed, it's quite a horror story. Anyway, the plot between the two of them was quickly thwarted. As for my mother-in-law, it seems she was in revenge mode because I not only rejected Matt's advances but also caused him to get injured. So, she conspired with Matt to mix peanut powder into my lunch. She probably thought that they could retrieve the $50,000 later. But, seeing me suffering more than he expected, Matt became frightened and hurriedly called an ambulance. By the way, it seems my mother-in-law had been trying to get the passcode for the bank account from Vicky all this time. Of course, there was no way my daughter would know the number, so it was a wasted effort, but she seemed to be filling my daughter's head with nonsense like, "Mommy is doing something wrong to make money. Grandma will take care of it. Oh, don't tell Mommy about this. If you do, she might get arrested by the police." That day, the mystery of my daughter's strange behavior towards me was finally solved.
What were you thinking, scaring your own grandchild like that? Aren't you ashamed of trying to steal your younger brother's wife? I always thought you were a fool, but I never expected this.
As Tony voiced his anger and disbelief, his fists trembling, Matt, perhaps feeling his pride hurt, retorted,
"Hey, don't get cheeky just because you're my younger brother. I'm way more handsome than you. If I had met Wendy before you did, she would have definitely married me."
This further fueled Tony's anger. But there was someone even angrier than my husband. Yes, that was me.
You've got to be kidding. Tony is a decent human being unlike you. There's no way I would marry a deluded jerk like you, even if hell freezes over. You middle-aged narcissist. Grow up and stop adding darling to my name.
Before I knew it, I was shouting every insult I could think of. Matt seemed to shrink under my intense glare and harsh words. Regaining my composure, I cleared my throat and told them in a calm voice,
"Anyway, your actions have crossed a line. I almost died, so I will be filing a criminal complaint for assault. Please pay the damages. I consulted at the local police station earlier. They advised me to discuss this with you first since we are family, but I have no intention of doing that now." No way. You're going to sue us."
Faced with our wrath, the two of them were pale as a ghost, prostrating themselves on the ground. Then they started to plead with us in trembling voices, trying to get us to drop the lawsuit.
"Wait, we didn't think you'd be hurt that badly."
"Yes, that's right. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. Forgive us, we're family, right?" At their pleas, Tony and I exchanged looks and started discussing. Just then, Vicky entered the room. Perhaps she was bothered by the commotion. Suddenly, my mother-in-law said with a forced smile,
"Come on, Vicky, I'm a little busy right now. Let's go back to your room."
At that moment, I hastily called out to my daughter,
"Did you, by any chance, tell your grandma about Mommy's peanut allergy?"
"Yes.
She told me to tell her about you, so I said that even one peanut would make it impossible for you to breathe and you'd die."
As I gently stroked my daughter's head, I then sent a cold glare at the two of them.
"There's no room for sympathy here. Accept your social sanctions quietly."
And so, the two of them, cast aside by me, were stunned and fell apart on the spot. Later, we hired a lawyer and formally charged my mother-in-law and brother-in-law with assault. Because it was a family dispute, they didn't end up in prison, but they had to pay about $13,000 for my medical expenses, compensation, and the like. Naturally, neither of them had any savings to cover this, having led such a dissolute life. In the end, they reluctantly sold their family home for cash and made the payment. And as for the two of them now without a home.
Sigh, it's going to be a little cramped in that house if all 5 of us are going to live there.
Tony, when are we going to do the extension and remodeling? Unbelievably, they seemed fully prepared to live in our house. These people are truly hopeless. Of course, such a ridiculous proposal wouldn't stand a chance.
What kind of nonsense are you spouting? Talk in your sleep when you're asleep.
It was probably an explosion of pent-up frustration. The two of them, vehemently rejected by us, hastily left the scene. We heard that they later rented a room in a rundown apartment. They are said to be living a tough life, surviving on the wages my brother-in-law earns from his part-time job. On the other hand, we had returned to our own home for the first time in half a year. Ah, such a peaceful atmosphere. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm sorry. It's my fault for deciding to live together. I should have thought more about it.
Don't worry about it. It's your seriousness that I like, that's why I married you.
Yes, my husband Tony often gets the short end of the stick due to his serious nature. But that's why, no, precisely because of that, I respect him. I continued speaking to my dejected husband.
You looked brave and cool when you punched Matt. Violence isn't good, though.
Hearing that, my husband chuckled sheepishly. Then, as he was holding our daughter, he said,
That's right. How about we all go out for some fun next week?
Vicky, where do you want to go?
The zoo.
Watching my daughter laugh with excitement, I savored the happiness. And I made a vow to continue saving that money for my daughter's future. I promise.